Thank you very much, Dr. Tan, for agreeing to join us today for this very interesting seminar. I would like to introduce to my colleagues, Dr. Seang Lin Tan. He is the James Edmund Dodds Chair in Obstetrics and Gynecology. He's a full professor at McGill University. He headed up the Obstetrics and Gynecology department for many years, from '94 to 2010. And he was the founding director of and medical director of Originelle Fertility Clinic and the Women's Health Centers in Montreal and Ottawa. He's a prolific scientist and educator. He's an author of over 18 books, hundreds of publications, over 300 scientific publications, hundreds of presentations around the world. He has recently been given 2 very prestigious lectureships in the UK, in London, and in the next little while, he's off to Oxford. He's a renowned expert on infertility and a pioneer in the simplification of in vitro fertilization. He founded the McGill Reproductive Center and headed the team that produced the world's first IVF and ICSI air transport pregnancies. He's a pioneer in the use of in vitro maturation and the use of to preserve fertility in young cancer patients. And a result of this groundbreaking work is the first in the world to accomplish a live delivery from an egg that had been vitrified and frozen and thawed in 2005. He's going to address a very interesting topic about female fertility that in reading his work and talking to him has implications for global health. So thank you very much, Dr. Tan, and I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Mayo, for inviting me to speak here. What I can start off with saying is this. I don't know whether my lecture has been good or bad, but the topic it covers is certainly very important. And why is this so? Josh, how do I change the slides? Okay. First and foremost, I'd like to pay tribute to my teachers, okay? Because I like Isaac Newton, although obviously not the same caliber, I say we all stand on the shoulder of giants. So when I started my career, way back in England, I was working as a consultant in University of London. At the same time, I had a private medical center where I worked together with Professor Howard Jacobs, the man who invented or discovered polycystic ovarian syndrome in 1985, and who published the first paper in the Lancet in 1985 on that. Professor Stuart Campbell, whose teacher, Ian Donald, was the person who introduced the use of ultrasound into medicine. And obviously, Bob Edwards, the Cambridge Don, who invented IVF, produced Louis Brown, and who won the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 2010. What I'd like to discuss with you today is this. What are the demographic changes around the world and which has led to some countries starting to decline population and other countries following suit soon after that? And what are the reasons that we have to do to preserve fertility for both medical reasons as well as for social reasons? What are the indications for elective egg freezing for medical and social indications? How do we preserve eggs by IVF or by IVM? How do we preserve the entire piece of ovarian tissue for preserving fertility? More controversially, I'll end it by talking a little bit about freezing ovarian tissue for delaying the menopause. Now, this is the map of the world as we all recognize. What does it show? This is a map showing different countries in the world with their relative fertility rates. So those countries in yellow, the United States, parts of Central Asia, have a stable population of around 2 children per couple. So for a country to remain stable in population, you need to have 2.1 children per couple on average, okay? So notice that other than these countries and sub-Saharan Africa, where there's still a rapidly growing population, much of the developed world, Canada, Western Europe, Russia, Japan, Korea, China, Australia, are now facing a demographic deficit because they have 2 or less children per couple, and therefore, gradually over a period of time, that those countries will get smaller and smaller. And if one were to stretch it ad infinitum, in theory, those countries would disappear completely. Now, as long ago as 15 years ago, The Economist magazine, in fact, highlighted the issue of a billion shades of grey. Now, those of us who follow the normal press, you realize that in France today, there are huge strikes going on in Paris right now because the French government is proposing increasing the retirement age from 62 to 64, right? And in Canada or other countries, we face the same problem. This is best illustrated in Japan, simply because Japan is a very static population, which does not allow for much immigration or immigration. So way back in 1880, the year where Commodore Perry sailed his gunboats into Tokyo Bay and forced the Emperor of Japan to open Japan to Western trade, Japan had a population of 37 million people. But at that time, almost all the citizens of Japan were either of the working age group, that in yellow, or in school, that in green. And a very tiny fraction were people who were in the retirement age group. Fast forward 100 years, with the rapid development of the economic status of Japan, Japan's population reached a peak of 128 million people in 2005. But notice here that 66% of the population in 2005 were working people, and only 20% were retirees, and 14% were in school, meaning there were 3.5 working people for each retired person. But now, with the decline of population of Japan, by the end of this century, Japan's population will go back down to 40 billion, as if the last 200 years did not exist at all. But the difference is that now there's barely 1.5 working people for one retired person. So you can imagine, if there's 1 working person for 1 retired person, unless that working person's productivity increases multiple by artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, robotic help, whatever else, it's impossible for a country to sustain itself. Okay? So that's what I mean to say is a big thing. Now, what does this mean? This changes the entire world. In 1950, the year some of us were being born, 55% of the world's population lived in Asia, because traditionally Asia has been the biggest continent in the world. Okay, only 9% lived in Africa, 22% live in Western Europe, 7% live in North America. But fast forward to the end of this century, Asia's population would account for less than 50% for the first time in human history, because of the rapid decline of population in China. Okay, and in fact, Asia will only form 43% of the world's population. Europe will go down 6%. Africa, on the other hand, will increase to 39%. So to put it bluntly, Asians account for 63% of the world's population 100 years ago, and now it still accounts for 63% of the world's population. But while white people accounted for almost 30% of the world's population, okay, in 1950, by 100 years later, it will grow down to less than 10%. Whereas black people would increase from 9% to 26%. Now you may say, why is this important? Well, frankly speaking, to someone like me, who is a Chinese person from Asia, it doesn't matter. I don't give a damn, bluntly, right? Are there more white people, more black people? What difference does it make to me? But if you are a Greek person or an Italian person living in a country which is becoming smaller and smaller, there is a big implications. So, for example, once the population starts decreasing, it's irreversible. And how do we manage this decline of humanity? So, the Lancet and the United Nations both showed that once the world's population reaches a peak of about 10 to 11 billion people, you start gradually going down. Now, this causes huge changes for the entire structure of healthcare and everything else in this world. Because we will note that in the last 100 or 200 years, everything has to do with increasing population, increasing need for transportation, increasing need for food, okay, contraception, treatment for menopausal people, okay? Food insecurity. All these are problems associated with a rising population. Now, what are the problems then facing a declining population? This is an area that is totally uncharted, and we basically have no clue. But we should be cognizant of the fact that this is happening, it's happening soon, and therefore we should be prepared for it. And that's why this is one of those areas that I think epidemiologists like yourselves might be interested in doing some studies. Now, if you take the G20, the top 20 countries in the world, from 2016 to 2021, just a 5-year period, okay? Saudi Arabia's population increased by 8%. Canada's population, largely because of immigration, so increased by 5%. Europe, barely around 0, less than 1%, okay? But Russia, Japan, and Italy actually had the decline of between 0.5% to 2%. Now, it doesn't matter whether we like Russia, we don't like Russia, for example, okay? Because frankly speaking, when you look at such data, our personal feelings about individual countries makes no difference, okay? But it is for the first time in human history where countries actually decline in population. And what is more significant is that if you look from now until the end of this century, okay, Korea's population will go down by half. China's population will go down by almost half. And China is the most striking simply because its population is so large. So imagine today, China has got 1.4 billion people. By the end of this century, if nothing is done, its population will go down to 771 million people. Luckily for us in Canada, even though we are not reproducing a lot, okay, we have a liberal government that's pushing immigration like crazy. And because of immigration, largely, our population will still increase, okay? Now, one of the reasons why China and India have become the biggest manufacturing economies of the world is because of the rising workforce. China because of urbanization, and India because, if you will note, 100 or 200 years ago, Indian men who were considered to be in the untouchable class did not seek gainful employment. But now, even if you're in socio-economic class 4, the untouchable class, you're able to get an Ivy League education and come back to be a minister in the federal government. So because of this, now there's exploding workforce in India. So these two accounts for this rapid rise of productive workforce in the world's two most populous countries. But it's changing. Within the next 20 years, the number of working adults between the ages of 20 to 64 in China will start dropping, and India will start dropping as well. And this has got huge economic implications. For example, China's economy is predicted to overtake the United States within the next 10 years. But because of the decline of China's population, US's economy is expected to surpass China by the end of this century from demographic changes, okay? So what does it tell us? That the biggest thing that China and Japan and America should compete against is not so much technological warfare, is who can produce and keep their populations more stable. You know, Israel is a particularly interesting case because Israel has a small population, but is able to keep high global GDP rankings together with high fertility, high immigration rate. And as you will see in many parts of this lecture, okay, to me, my hero is Israel, because I think that they are doing a lot of things right, where they are able to keep young women educated and still have children, something that eludes most other countries. So, for example, Italy, the Prime Minister of Italy actually remarks cryptically, there was the fastest shrinking population in Europe. Italy may be destined to disappear one day. So can you imagine those of us who enjoy going to Italy every year, every two years for a holiday, okay? So there's no more Italy in the world. I mean, it's a big thing. Countries are starting to take initiatives. Russia, for example, gives out a lot of medals. So there's a medal for the Order of Parental Honor if you've got more than 6 children, okay? And they'll give the equivalent of $10,000, which obviously in Russia is a huge amount of money. If a woman has got more than 2 children, they get $10,000 as a reward. Okay. However, once a society is used to low fertility, it becomes irreversible. So, for example, China, they have done many things correct in order to raise their economies so successfully in the last 50 years. But one thing that they did, which is very serious, is that they had a one-child policy for too long. And because of that, okay, from their families being used to having 5, 6 children, the average Chinese family now are used to having one child. And even though the government of China now has very rapidly reversed the policy and strongly encouraged now the population of 2, 3, 4, or as many children as they want, they're not able to change the mindset anymore. Because once you're used to having only one child, it's very difficult, and that child now takes up so much of your attention and so much of your time. It's very difficult to reverse the mindset. Said, look, you should now have many other children, you know. And major concerns include medical, financial, environmental. And it doesn't help matters that, for example, studies have shown that there's the steady decline in sperm concentrations in men by about 1% every year since 1972. Okay, the popular magazines tell us freeze your eggs and free your career. Newsweek, Time magazine also agree. And our research here in Montreal, for example, started way back in 2003. In 2003, the New York Times reported that we in Canada here were the first to start doing ovarian research to slow down the biological clock. Now, why is this so important? Because unlike men who produce new sperm all their lives, even though the sperm may not be as good, women don't produce eggs. Once they are born, they are fixed. Those eggs that they have are those eggs they have. And the number and the quality decline with increasing age. And although there's a lot of work now about stem cell work, artificial eggs is one, they're all under research. So the Wallace and Kelsey model shows that at the time of birth, at puberty, a woman's ovaries has about 300,000 eggs. But by the time they reach about 30 years of age, they're left with only 180,000 eggs. And by the time they reach about 35, they have only about 16,000 left of eggs. And by the time they reach about 40, they've got 8,000 eggs. So you can see from over 250,000 eggs at 25, okay? By the time you reach 40 years old, they're down to 8,000 eggs. And unfortunately, the best eggs are used up when you're young. This is just the Darwinian law of natural selection. At the same time, it's interesting to see that because of the white 95% confidence, there are some women, let's say 2.5% of women, who will still have eggs in the ovaries until they reach about 60 years old. And that's why you will hear of some cases that women, strangely enough, can spontaneously get pregnant in their 50s. Okay? And this shows again the rapid decline of fertility. Now, this has got significant implications for childbearing. So, for example, it was published by Hefner in the New England Journal of Medicine that the pregnancy rates go right down and miscarriage rates go right up as women get older. And the risk of having Down syndrome, for example, increases steadily from 1 in 1,200 to 1 in 30 as you get older over this 20-year period. And in vitro fertilization itself doesn't have matters. So when I started my career in England, I published 2 papers in the Lancet with Professor Jake Edwards, showing that the white line were data that we took from Oxford, Martin Vessey's group, of women who had recently stopped using the birth control pill. So these were their pregnancy rates after 3 months and 6 months. And we compared the results of IVF. We found that IVF, up to the age of 34, in fact, gave better results than that of spontaneous conception in fertile people. But when you became more than 35 years of age, the results were worse. Now, in the last 30 years, okay, today the success rates of IVF are much higher. Today, for example, in the best IVF centers in the world, a single cycle of IVF can produce success rates in the order of 70 to 80%, not 50% anymore. However, this trend of having lower results still remains the same. Whether it's in Montreal, it's in New York, in Paris, in London, in Los Angeles, the same. No one has been able to change this reduction of pregnancy rates with increasing age. And this is largely because of increased genetic abnormalities in the embryo. So you can see here, if a woman is young, an egg donor, 25 years of age, 75% of the eggs are genetically healthy. But by the time she's 43 or more, only 6% are normal. When she's 48 or 49, maybe 1% are normal. So what causes delayed childbearing today? The advent of the birth control pill, because before the use of the pill, women had children when they were very young, right? They're waiting for the right partner, or their partner wishes to date having children. Now, we must remember again changes in social circumstances. Until our present generation, the normal trend was for young women who were teenagers or early 20s to marry men who were slightly older than them. Okay? But today, women now delay childbearing. They go for university education. They do all the good things. They study hard. They work well. They have a good career. And then they want their children when they're in their 30s. But they may only meet the right man who is like younger than them. So a 35 or 36-year-old lady might feel the biological urge to have a child. But her 32-year-old male partner may say, well, I'm still a young man. There's no real urgency. Why not wait for another 10 years more? Because as far as he's concerned, there's no real hurry. They may also have to care for aged parents, health issues, getting education, advancing career. So you notice here, for example, okay, the more educated a woman is, the worse it is in terms of childbearing. So a British publication showed that for ladies who have got primary school education, high school education, or university education, the more educated they are, the higher a proportion of childlessness at the age of 34. And over the succeeding 20 years of time, it's become worse and worse. So which means that, as Lee Kuan Yew, the first Prime Minister of Singapore, said that for the first time in human history, in fact, the gene pool of the human race might actually be declining. Why? Because historically, men who were successful had many wives and many, many children. Men who were less successful, they were not able to get married, and their offspring and their gene pool would gradually die away. But now, because of the welfare state, as well as one man, one woman norm, men who are successful, who marry women who are successful, who then have a lot of education, tend to have few children. But men who are not successful are still supported by the welfare state, and their wives, who may have little education, will be there reproducing at home. So therefore, over a period of generations, it means that for the first time, the gene pool of the human race might be declining. Now, this is obviously very controversial, but that was the point she made. Okay. Now, I said that lack of knowledge. So this is the first thing that I would think that I would like members of your department to think about. Okay. So this was a study done in the University of British Columbia. Okay, one of our better universities in Canada. When surveyed, 20% of the students felt that fertility stayed the same between the ages of menarche and the age of menopause. So when asked, do you think that a woman at 20 and a woman at 45 has the same fertility? 20% said yes. And 3% actually felt that even after a woman stops menstruating, they could still get pregnant naturally. Which sounds to me, okay, as a doctor, extremely surprising. That a student at UBC should think that after menopause, they can still get pregnant naturally. 3% of them. And I just wonder, what is this rate in McGill or UC of Montreal or among CJAP students in Canada, in Quebec, for example, okay? And just in case we thought that maybe Canadians are not very well informed, okay? Another study done around the same time in Stanford and Berkeley in the States, okay? 63% were unaware that fertility declines from 30 to 34. 60% feels that IVF always works, and 80% feels that if you exercise, eat an organic diet, you do not smoke, you don't drink, your eggs will be good. And this is something I hear from my patients all the time. We will tell them, you know, you're 42, your eggs are not that good anymore. And she will turn around and say, look, what do you mean my eggs are not good? I don't smoke, I don't drink, I live healthily, I exercise, my eggs has to be good, and I look great. And 80% of students wanted to know their ovarian reserve, and if low, more than half will consider egg freezing. So what I'd like to do is a first study with your department, if anybody is interested, is what is the proportion of students who are CJAP, high school, university students, among allophones, anglophones, francophones, Jewish people across Canada, Quebec and different provinces, about the awareness of the decline of fertility, and what would encourage them to either have children younger or to preserve their fertility. You know what I'm saying? Because this, I think, are the type of studies that we need as a country moving forward if we are going to combat this problem. Secondly, is there's a high cost to women for taking time out. Okay, So this study published in the Harvard Business Review showed that in comparison to women who did not take time off to look after kids, okay, they earn 100% of the income. For those who took a year off to look after the children, when they came back to work, they lost 11% of the income. And for those who took 3 years off work, when they came back, they lost 37% of the income, even if they were now coming back to do the same job. So again, this is within the control of the country, right? There's no reason why women should be penalized for taking time off work to look after their kids. If we as a country recognize that childbearing is not just for the benefit of the individual and her family, but it's for the benefit of all of us in society, then our views on this will change and say maybe we should be having legislation in order to encourage and to help women who are young to have children and so on. So it's just a question of how you approach things. So how do we preserve fertility? When we at McGill and other places started preserving fertility, we focused on the most difficult patients, those with cancer, who were going to become menopause because they were having chemotherapy or radiotherapy, and they would become totally infertile after that, okay? Soon we moved to other medical conditions such as lupus, Turner's, and other conditions. When these were shown to be effective, social fertility preservation became very fashionable, and both the American as well as the European Society of Fertility then passed statements saying that egg freezing for social fertility preservation was now accepted as standard of care and should no longer be considered experimental. More recently, freezing of ovarian tissue has been considered the same way. But there still remains some controversies about social egg freezing, which I'll talk about later as we go along, okay? So the whole aim of social egg freezing is that if you freeze your eggs when you're 25 to 29, and then use them when you're 40 or 44, you will have the same chances of success of having a baby as if you're 25 to 29, okay? Now, you'll see along the course of this lecture that I'm a very prejudiced person. I come from the point of view that every woman in this world should freeze her eggs. For a simple reason, because look, if a man is told that he's got cancer and he's about to have chemotherapy, no one will say it's unusual for him to be offered sperm freezing. This is what is done everywhere in the world. But a woman does not need to have cancer or any devastating medical condition in order for her to lose her fertility. Sooner or later, whether 5 years later, 10 years later, 20 years later, 30 years later, she loses her fertility. So why should she not undertake preventive medicine to preserve her fertility when she's young, so that she can use it when she's older? Even if she's happily married with children now. Why? Because unfortunately in our society, relationships today do not last forever. We know of friends, we know of relatives who may be happily married 2 years ago, but now have a relationship breakup, right? And very often when they break up, it is the woman who loses, because the man, who could be in her 30s or her 40s or early 50s, will move on, marry a younger woman and start a new family. But the lady who is now in the late 30s, early 40s, mid 40s, will have great difficulty now starting a family with a new partner, and they form the majority of patients who come to see people like me, right? And they all would say, if only we had frozen our eggs when we were younger, we won't be in this situation today. Yesterday, I saw a very, very tragic patient, okay, who doesn't mind being publicly identified. She's 49 years old. She's a very famous doctor in Quebec, okay? She had 2 children with her previous partner. Then she had a child at the age of 44 with her present partner. At the age of 48, her youngest son fell into the swimming pool and drowned. Drowned at 48, when she was 48, okay? Now, she did not mind egg donation, okay? However, her husband is not happy about doing egg donation with her during IVFs. She called up McGill, she called St. Justin, she called everybody. No one will touch her with the barge pole because they said, look, you're 48. There's no hope in hell. So she came to see me and said, I told her, look, there is no hope in hell, okay? I can't even treat you in Montreal without going to jail, okay? However, if you want, just for closure, I don't mind offering you treatment in Ontario, with the understanding that if it doesn't work, you then consider egg donation seriously. And I've done the same for some patients from the US, for example, and who may try once or twice for IVF, but then realizing that their eggs are terrible or there are no eggs, they then go through egg donation with the comfort that they have done their best with their own eggs. But all these are tragedy cases. They need not have happened if only they preserved their fertility when they were younger. So these were articles in the newspapers about our program for egg freezing way back in the early 2000s. Okay. Now, when we first did egg freezing using our McGill cryo leaf method, okay, and we compared against slow freezing that was done in other centers, okay, we can see that our results were significantly better in terms of survival rates, in terms of good quality embryos that reached the 5th day, ready for implantation. And over the last 10 or 15 years, in Spain, in other countries, the indications of egg freezing from age, endometriosis, low ovarian reserve, ovarian surgery, others have keep on rising. What is more interesting that you saw in Spain, for example, that college educated students, high school students, elementary school students, or even those with no education froze their eggs, okay? But unlike those for medical indications who froze their eggs when they were young, those who did for social reasons, unfortunately, did it mostly when they're older. So for social reasons, most women froze eggs when they were over the age of 35, okay? Which is unfortunate. Why? Because the same study showed that if you froze eggs when you're less than 35 years of age, okay, and you froze 10 eggs, for example, there's a 60% chance of you having a baby from these frozen eggs. But if you froze your eggs when you're more than 36 years of age, the same 10 eggs that are frozen will give you a 30% chance of having a baby. So freezing eggs when you're young gives you a better result than freezing eggs when you're older. Now, another point now is cancer. More and more young people are getting cancer for a variety of reasons, okay? And in 2020, approximately 1 million new young female cancers were reported around the world, okay? Now, 50 years ago, most of these women with cancers would have died. But today, most of them survive, but then they are faced with fertility issues. Therefore, before they start their cancer treatment, okay, you can either preserve their eggs or preserve their ovarian tissue, depending on their age. So the way we do it nowadays is that if a woman with cancer approaches me, I ask her 2 questions. How long can chemotherapy be delayed, and can hormones be given for you? If chemotherapy can be delayed for a few weeks and hormones can be given, we do IVF, collect the eggs, freeze the embryos or freeze the eggs. If, however, chemotherapy cannot be delayed or hormones should not be given, we collect eggs from her without giving her drugs, mature the eggs in the laboratory, this IVM, and then freeze the eggs or freeze the ovarian tissue. At the same time, we freeze a piece of the ovary or the entire ovary and freeze the tissue as well as the eggs there. So we were the first to do IVF without using drugs. And this was published in the New England Journal of Medicine by our group at McGill in 1999, where women with an average age of 35 years, we collected from them 10 immature eggs, matured for them about 90% of them, and then after putting the fertilized eggs back in them, we had 4 out of the 25, 10 out of the 25, 40% of them had a baby. And over the next 10 years, our results kept on improving, okay, until we had about 56% of them getting pregnant successfully each time we did IVF, up to the age of 40. And this method of IVM nowadays is getting easier and easier to learn. For example, Dr. Hatines is a young Turkish doctor who came to Originelle here and worked with me for a few weeks, went back to Turkey, and his center is only 2 or 3 years old, but he's able to get a 35% live birth rate with IVF, putting back just 1 single embryo. And you can get lots of eggs without drugs. For example, my colleague, Dr. Dahan, actually extracted 125 eggs in a woman without using any drugs, which is a hell of eggs, okay? It's enough for her to have 10 babies up there. More recently, instead of using injection of hormones, even using the pills, 5 days of oral pills, we were able to get a 40% success rate using IVM. And we've invented our own needle called the Steiner-Tan needle, which is quite widely used now for collecting eggs or freezing, okay? And our needle, the Steiner-Tan needle, compared to the regular Cook needle, has been shown by an RCT published in the United States that it gives better results. We can collect eggs at any time of the cycle. For example, I received a phone call from New York some 15 years ago from a doctor in New York City who was trying to freeze eggs for a 40-year-old breast cancer patient who started ovulating before she was ready to freeze her eggs, okay? So because of that, the eggs were lost. and there was no time for her to be starting another egg freezing cycle. So in desperation, I agreed to see her. She drove up from New York to Montreal. On the Monday morning, I collected from her 4 immature eggs, matured for her 2 of them, then froze those 2 embryos. And 3 years later, when she finished her cancer treatment, put back those 2 embryos and she had a baby. Similarly, my colleague, Dr. Demetrius, has successfully collected eggs both in the first half of the menstrual cycle and second half of the menstrual cycle. And we get good results either way. And the eggs that are frozen and the babies that are born, the genetic abnormality rate is 2.5%, is the same as spontaneous, instead of fertile women with spontaneous conceptions. Okay. How fast can it be done? There was a Wednesday morning, I was sitting in my clinic in the Royal Victoria Hospital. This patient came to see me. She was 33 years of age. She had stage 2 breast cancer. She was the 10th day of her menstrual cycle, and she was due to start her chemotherapy the following Wednesday. And her oncologist told her, you should not use fertility drugs. So that day, on the Wednesday morning, we did for her an ultrasound scan. On Friday morning, we collected from her 19 immature eggs. And over the weekend, we matured for her 17 mature eggs. And those 17 eggs were frozen for her by Sunday evening. So they were able to freeze for her 17 eggs without any delay in her cancer treatment and without any chemotherapy or surgery. Okay. And this was the first paper published in Lancet 2004. Okay. And the results have been very, very good. Okay, at all. We are trying to improve our results even better by basic research, looking at L-carnitine in supplementation IVF media or with glutathione. So we're still trying to get our results better as far as we go along, okay? And we can use it for women with lupus nephritis, okay, or a variety of different cancers. So we have treated patients now with virtually every cancer known to man, okay, to preserve their fertility. The advantage of freezing eggs socially is that it gives women a chance to be more established in their career so that there will be greater financial stability, more opportunities for the child. Okay. Now, it is important that there be proper education. For example, a few weeks ago, I was in London. My wife happened to just walk into, I think, Marks and Spencer's, okay, staring her in the face, a diagram here to do self-breast exam to pick up breast cancer. Now, when Nancy Mayo and I were young, such posters did not exist around the world, right? We used to see advertisements for cigarette smoking, how good it was for men on horseback riding there smoking Marlboro, right? So we did a worldwide campaign to tell people smoking is bad, breast exam is good, pap smear screening is good, mammogram is good, and having children young or preserve your eggs is good. That's what we need. And in that sense, okay, I think epidemiologists have a major part to play this role. Now, today, there's a huge discrimination against women. Look, our famous Prime Minister, Pierre Trudeau, had a son at the age of 70. Charlie Chaplin had a son when he was 80. Bernie Ecclestone, the owner of Formula One, just announced the birth of his son at the age of 89 because he had a girlfriend who was 25 years old. Okay. Most notoriously, James Doonan, that a lot of us admire, as Scotty in Star Trek, he had his 7th child when he was 80 years of age, when he already had Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and diabetes. And when he died 5 years later, BBC actually likened him as an enterprise, saying that he boldly went to fatherhood for the 7th time at 80 years of age, where no man had that good before. So what I put to use is, okay, when men do, frankly speaking, very stupid things. I mean, who in the right mind would have a child when you have got Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and diabetes, and 80 years old, right? If a woman were to do this when she's 60 years old, people think she's crazy and she should be locked up in prison, right? But when men do this, the BBC, he's a great story, he's a great man, right? And yet, women who try to have a baby when they're 53 or 54, it looks upon as if they are something very weird. So what I'm trying to say to you here is that we need to have a more fairness in this world. I'm not suggesting that women have children in their 80s, okay? What I'm saying here is this, okay? Men can have children at any age, but few choose to do so after the age of 50 or 60. So therefore, I'm sure if we were to have egg freezing universally for all women, we could have a regulation that these women should not use those frozen eggs after the age of 55, for example, which is the age in Canada and the United States where women should try to have a baby. Okay, so just like we have an age limit for women having children even with donor eggs, if they freeze their own eggs, you can have the same thing, but you can debate whether it should be 55 or 56, but you can have the same age limit. So what I'm proposing here is that social egg freezing should be placed as a medical need, and coverage egg freezing should be in fact more supported by the government than IVF. Okay, and this is what is done in Israel. In Israel, egg freezing is free of charge, and every woman in Israel can freeze up to 20 eggs for 5-year renewable periods, and to be used up to the age of 54. And as I said, Israel is a very good country in this regard, simply because whatever we may think about the policy of Israel, okay, Israel has a very pro-natalist policy. They feel, rightly or wrongly, that they are under constant threat by the surrounding Muslim countries, that if they do not keep their population up, they'll be wiped out. So since the founding of Israel, women in Israel try to have a big family, and they try to have children when they're very young. So they follow the adage of the Bible, go forth and multiply. Okay, so because of this, okay, they do everything they can to help women have children younger and to have more children without sacrificing their careers and without sacrificing their education. Okay, and I put it to you, if Israel can do it, so can we in Canada or any other country, because we are no poorer than them, right? What is more serious is this. Look at this chart here. If a couple wants to have 3 children, let's say if I see you, let's say if someone like Nancy asks her son or daughter, how many kids do you want to have? And they say, I'd like to have 3 children. What must Nancy tell the child? If you want to have 3 children and you want to avoid doing IVF, you need to start having the first child at the age of 23. If you're prepared to do IVF 28, now I put it to you in the audience here. How many of your friends and relatives start thinking of having children at 23? Virtually none. So that is the problem we have in North America. Okay, we have combined egg freezing now with ovarian tissue freezing as well. Okay, now many years ago, I thought that the best way is to freeze the entire ovary. Okay, so in fact, my group at McGill was the first with Roger Gosden to freeze the entire ovary of rats. Okay, so we took some rats, we removed the ovaries and either froze them or did not freeze them, and then transferred those rats' ovaries to other rats. And we found that 4 of the 7 rats that received frozen ovaries actually had healthy babies. So we demonstrated for the first time, we was able to freeze the entire rat ovary and then successfully produce babies. Okay. A few years later, using the same methods, other groups started doing in bigger animals. So in sheep, they were able to preserve ovarian function for 6 years, and then they stopped. Okay. But human ovaries are just too large. So no one in the world has managed to freeze the entire woman's ovary, unfortunately. Okay. So because of this, you have to freeze the cortex of the ovary where the eggs are. So this is the cross-section of the ovary, okay, where the cortex here is, and this is where all the egg cells are. So Jack Dornay in Belgium was the first to freeze ovarian tissue in the patient with lymphoma. After a few years, the piece of tissue was transplanted back and the woman had a baby. A few years later, Mayro in Israel did the same thing, and a baby published in the New England Journal of Medicine 2005. Okay. So today, you can take an entire ovary, cut it into 20 pieces, freeze the ovarian tissue, and then later on put it back years later. Over the years, the reasons for freezing ovarian tissue has varied depending on the age of the patient. Okay. So in the younger girls, 6 to 12 years of age, most of the cancers that are found are autoimmune disorders or blood cancers. Okay. But as you get older, most of the cancers are breast cancers for freezing ovarian tissue. This is most probably done in Europe. Okay. In humans, freezing the entire ovary for transplantation has not been successful except for siblings, which was done by Sherman Silber in New Orleans, like in the St. Louis, which was published in the New England Journal in 2008. And these are the countries where ovarian tissue is frozen and transplanted to have babies. Okay. And it's unfortunate that even though we've got lots of ovarian tissue frozen at McGill, for example, none of them have been put back to produce a baby yet. Okay, so this was a meta-analysis done recently, we showed that fresh ovarian tissue that's frozen is better than frozen. Okay. So obviously the way we freeze ovarian tissue is not perfect yet. But what is good is that when the ovarian tissue is transferred back, okay, within 5 months, okay, the hormone levels return to normal. FSH declines, LH declines, and menses go back to normal, okay? And with each piece of ovarian tissue transferred back, okay, the ovaries, the ovarian tissue produces hormones that cause continual menstrual cycles for between 1 to 5 years. And the ovarian tissue can be put back either under the skin or else in the ovarian fossa in different ways, okay? I won't bore you with the technical details of the surgery, okay? The ovarian tissue can either be frozen by the slow freezing method or else by the rapid freezing method, okay? And both have got their pros and cons, okay? You can either transfer the ovarian tissue back where the tummy is, near where the ovary original was, which then gives the woman the chance of giving birth naturally, spontaneously, or put the ovarian tissue somewhere else. For example, outside the pelvic cavity, in a forearm, in the breast tissue, in the tummy, or underneath the skin, to make it less complicated for the surgery. But then you need to do in vitro after that every time in order to extract the eggs. So there are different methods now of trying to improve the survival of this ovarian tissue that has been frozen, okay? Now, Klaus Andersen, my colleague in Denmark, is now proposing something even more radical. He's saying, look, if the ovarian tissue once frozen can be last for so many years, why don't we routinely remove the ovaries of young women, freeze the ovarian tissue, okay? And then when she reaches the age of natural menopause, put some pieces back into her so that she will never enter menopause, okay? His argument is life expectancy has increased by more than 30 years in the 20th century and continues to increase. Many women live decades in menopausal deprived of naturally produced hormones linked to menopausal disorders such as osteoporosis and cardiovascular disease. And HRTs, they use to alleviate menopausal side effects, but there are some complications using HRT, okay? And all this is not controversial at all, okay? He also points out that transferring back this ovarian tissue can lead to higher levels of hormones, which could last for a number of years. And he then goes on to argue that by doing this, you may extend menopause safely, okay? So the question, however, is that this has not been established. Is this method safe? Is there an age limit you can do it for? Would the risk of cancer increase because you put back ovarian tissue for the next 30 years, for example? So imagine if a woman continues menstruating until they're 80 years old. Firstly, does she want to do that? Number two, is it safe to do so? Okay. So many more clinical trials are needed to evaluate safety and efficacy before this becomes routine clinical use, okay? So you can see here, global fertility rate is declining, okay? And if you look at rich countries, medium countries, and poor countries, okay? It's only Israel among the countries which are moderate to rich countries that stands out to have a high fertility rate. So by the year 2100, Israel will be the only developed country with a fertility rate more than above replacement level, okay? So therefore, this is what they do, okay? And why? Because in Israel, any woman can get 2 in vitro cycles, can get as many IVF cycles free of charge by the government as much as possible until they've got 2 children per partner. And because women start very young in Israel, okay, there are some women who might try to have IVF, to have 2 children in their early 20s with partner number 1, with a second partner in their late 20s, with a third partner in the early 30s, a fourth partner in their late 30s, with a fifth partner in their early 40s. So there have been IVF cycles, 40, 50, 60 IVF cycles been done with the same patient, okay, in Israel. And this has been done for the last 30 or 40 years, and there's been no increase of any medical disorder. So we know for a fact that doing repeated IVF cycles may be expensive, but does not carry any medical risks. Israel also gives 40 weeks of maternity leave for new mothers, okay? So if you look at this, all these birth rates are declining except Israel's, which could stay up, okay? So in my last 3 slides, I'll show you what I propose, okay? In order to reverse demographic decline in any country, first, we must increase awareness of fertility declines with increasing age. we should work with people from epidemiology to see the knowledge of the decline of fertility of francophones, allophones, anglophones in high schools, CJEPs, university of both sexes. We should advise them of the reduced fertility, increased miscarriage and chromosome abnormalities, high age, and advise them ideally of children younger. This fertility decline should be taught in schools, CJEPs, universities, and workplace, just like anti-smoking, PEP screening, breast cancer, and mammogram screening programs have been successfully done in the last 50 years. The entire population should be made aware that having more children is not just for the individual family benefit, but for the entire society as well. Once this first most critical step is done, then you have to say, how do we avoid or eliminate impediments to early childbearing? For example, there should be task forces established in universities, colleges, workplaces to facilitate motherhood and avoid women having to lose out financially by taking time off work to care for young children. To follow pro-natalist policies of countries like Israel, but modify them suitable for each country. Greater maternity benefits and facilitate ability to bring in temporary labor for childcare. For example, look, when I grew up in Singapore and in Malaysia, for example, every middle-income person was able to bring in temporary maids from Philippines, Indonesia, Bangladesh, Laos, Thailand to help them look after their children for a few years until they grow up. But when these kids grew up, their live-in maids went back home. Okay, this is something that could be considered in Canada, but we don't have that because in Canada, once they come in, they become a citizen, and therefore the requirements to bring them in is much more serious. Okay, they need, for example, a grade 11 education or university education to come to Canada, which is not necessarily that all they're doing to help you clean your house and look up and change the baby's nappies. Okay, so then increase access to fertility treatment. Okay, cut off funding for ineffectual treatments such as artificial insemination in favor of more effective treatments as IVF. Provide more government funding for IVF until everyone has 2 children per partner like in Israel. Free egg freezing for 20 to 30 eggs for each woman, which can be up to the age of 55. Enhance research to improve treatments which reduce the burden of women, for example, drug-free IVF, home monitoring, artificial intelligence, and reverse increased aneuploidy with increasing age. Women should be advised of reduced fertility, increased miscarriage, and increased chromosome abnormalities with increased age, and advise their children younger. Egg freezing should be offered to post-pubertal women, while ovarian tissue freezing can be suitable for pre-pubertal girls. Young women should routinely preserve their fertility for their own personal egg bank. It is time to consider as well ovarian tissue freezing and transplantation in future. Regarding delaying menopause, okay, further tests and studies need to be done. So with this, I'd like to thank for 2 groups of people. First, my team at McGill that I was privileged to lead from 1994 to 2010. Okay, so this was my team at McGill at the old Royal Victoria Hospital at Entrance, and now my present team at Originelle. And most of all, I'd like to acknowledge the assistance and support of my most devoted helper, Grace Tan, my wife, okay, who got a first-class honors from University of British Columbia, a master's from the London School of Economics, a DPhil from Oxford University, and a double law degree from McGill, but for the last 30 years has subordinated her career in order to help advance mine. Thank you very much.
Great, we can all clap. Thank you. That was amazing. That was I really enjoyed that. And I know Deb has been making some comments, and I'm going to ask Deb to ask the first questions.
The first questions is right.
Followed by Nicole.
Dr. Tan, thank you for that wonderful presentation. I took so many notes. Just to give you a bit of background, I'm a psychologist and a researcher. You keep saying you need epidemiology. You also need psychologists who do research. One of the things you mentioned was the causes of delayed childbearing. One that was not on your slide that clinically I see a lot is fear of being a bad mother. Okay, this is something, being a parent is one of the most difficult jobs there is out there. I know that as a mom myself. So that's something that we need to think about as well. You put up some slides where we were supposed to be surprised that people think that they could still conceive when they're later in age. I was not surprised by that. And the reason for that, and you touched upon it towards the end, is there's a lot of misinformation or lack of information. In high school, people are not taught about this. This should be already in the curriculum in high school. You talked about parental leave. I think that's really important. I'm doing one of the first studies looking at parental leave in fathers, because fathers matter and women need that support. I tell all my female patients to freeze their eggs in their early 30s, by the way. My physician colleagues had already told me that. And then the other thing that we need to talk about that should also be in that slide at the end is going through fertility treatment is psychologically difficult. Couples need better support. And from my understanding right now, other than Dr. Janet Takafman, who is a specialist in the area, there is a gap. I mean, we can't find psychologists for depression. Like there's an 8-month waiting list for private practice, myself included. I'll stop there.
I totally agree with what you say, okay? When you say that there's a fear of being a bad parent, I know what you're saying. Even my son, okay, who is in his late 30s, I told him, okay, why don't you have children fast? You know, I need to be a grandfather, right? He turns around and said, look, I look at you and mom, okay, and I'm not sure whether I'll be a good father.
So I do a lot of work on fathers. I have an intervention called Healthy Dads, which Dr. Chan helped me develop. I think you know him.
Peter Chan.
Yeah.
Okay. So Deborah, maybe after this conversation, you should drop me an email.
Yes.
And offline, we should discuss further about other things, okay?
Absolutely.
How to get more psychologists? I mean, you know that more than me, right? How should we get more psychologists? Because it seems to be over the years, it's becoming more and more difficult. It used to be a bachelor's degree, then they made it a master's, and now they're making a PhD, right?
You know, Dr. Tam, they only accept 6 students. We're trying to change that. This can't be.
Yeah.
I just accepted 2 male students. There are no males anymore in psychology. I specifically asked for males. They gave me 2 this year.
Okay.
Good. Nicole, you had a lot of comments on the chat.
I just would like your opinion on the perception of primary care and counseling for women for fertility preservation. I think there's a lot of misconception. Well, I think, you know, after the age of 35, I think if most women spontaneously ask, they will be told, yes, you can consult. But I think before the age of 35, it's not something that's discussed at all by family practice. And it's actually frowned upon below. I mean, I speak from, you know, knowing people who have gone through this process. So I wonder what your perception is on when primary care should be counseling women to do social egg freezing, apart from the fact that, you know, there's a whole cost issue. But I think, you know, right now the general practice is done, you know, after the age of 35, when that's clearly too late from the data you showed. And what are your thoughts, and what is happening right now to kind of pass that message to primary care? Because I think spontaneously women won't ask that in their early 30s.
Yeah. Firstly, I think that, you know, if you have let's say if you have a young woman, okay, who's in her early 20s, okay, in one of the early conversations you should have with her is to say, have you given some thought as to how many kids you and your partner want to have in your lifetime, right? It is not the same if somebody says, I just want 1 child and I don't want anymore, right? Versus somebody who says, I want 2 or 3 or 4 children. So obviously, the more children they want to have, the younger they should start. That's number 1, okay? Number 2 is this, it's as the cost, okay? Many people think it's very expensive, but in fact, it's not as expensive as you would think it is, okay? Sure, in the US, for example, 1 cycle of egg freezing is like $50,000 US, okay? But in Canada, in Quebec anyway, the price here is of 4,500 Canadian. Okay, so I agree it's not very, very inexpensive, but it's no more than taking a trip down to New York City for a holiday. Okay, and I think that in fact many ladies could probably count on their parents for their help, because I'm sure many women who are in their 50s or 60s or parents, men and 50s, would more be happy. They are more keen on their children having kids, grandkids, than their kids themselves having kids. Okay, and what is there? And what is giving your son or daughter a present of $4,000 to preserve her ability to give you a grandchild? Seriously, right? Rather than giving her an American Express card to go for free or buying a new car, whatever, right? You know,
Yeah.
this is
Completely agree.
Something that also like. Next thing is that some people say, well, they may never use it. which is true, okay? But let me ask you, okay? How many of you in this audience have ever had your house burned down by fire, or your friends' houses? No, right? I personally don't know a single person who has had their homes burned down by fire. But we all buy fire insurance, just in case that ever happens, right? So the same way, okay, that no one expects that you will need you to use those eggs, okay? And we hope you don't have to use those eggs. But if you didn't, but it's comforting to know that if you did use it, is that. That's all. That's the whole idea of preventative medicine, right? You know.
Mhm.
Yeah. And anybody else? I see Claire made some comments. I don't know if she's still here. Anybody else have some a very sort of thinking talk, getting us to think about? Of course, I'm past that date, but
Do you know what I'm curious to know what the education is about fertility for primary practice and the College of Family Physicians and kind of continuing education in Quebec. What does that look like?
Nicole, there's some work published by Dr. Phyllis Zelkowitz that has looked at education of healthcare professionals, young people, as well as men with cancer. I can send that to you if you'd like.
Sure.
Well, I think firstly, Deborah, if you can send it to me as well, I appreciate it, okay? Number
Okay.
two, Nicole, that if you can arrange with your new department chief or whatever, I wouldn't mind giving rounds in family medicine, for example, this issue.
Yeah.
Because I think this is something that is important, that people look, we can never force people to do what they wouldn't want to do. But at the very least, we should educate them. And what is worse for me is that I see many patients, okay? I'm not against abortion, but I see some patients, okay, who come and see me at the age of 39, okay, asking for IVF when they did an abortion when they were 38 years old, okay? And this was, they have been married for the last 10 years. So they were married from the age of 28 to 40, okay? And then age of 38, they decided to do the abortion because in their mind it was not the right time, okay? And 39, then they come for the IVF, okay? And when I asked them, did no one ever speak to you at all at 38 when you had an abortion, that if you do an abortion, you might be putting yourself to a greater difficulty of a baby next year? They said nobody answered that question at all. It's almost that our doctors here are so underpaid that the moment they see a patient coming in, treat them. That's it. There's no time for counseling.
There's stigma too on the topic.
Yeah.
When you do rounds, I'll come with you.
Good. That's great. Well, I want to thank you very much, Dr. Tan, for this very enlightening talk and very educational. And I see lots of work in health literacy that needs to be done at earlier ages. And so I'll end the session. And I want to thank you very much for your time and your expertise. And clearly you're very passionate and empathetic care of this situation. So thanks again.
We'll be in touch.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Nancy. Bye.
Great. Bye.